Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is Mark Sinek and I'm a principal at SBI, a sales and marketing consultancy dedicated to helping you make your number. With me today is one of SBI's partners and my co-host, John Staples. How you doing, John?
Doing really well.
Thank you. Good to know. To all of you listening or watching, thanks for joining us today. Our purpose is to help you make your number by speaking with business experts about things you are dealing with in real life in your company. Today's guest is Alan Foster. Alan is the co-author of the book Power Score, Your Formula for Leadership Success. Alan is a principal at GH Smart. He serves private equity investors, Fortune 500 clients, and nonprofit organizations in the areas of leadership selection, development, and organizational transformation. Prior to joining GH Smart, Alan was a senior manager with Bain & Company in their New York and London offices. And while at Bain, Alan worked in more than 20 industries. He led teams that assisted clients in turning around operational performance and evaluating major acquisitions. Alan also led projects to reinforce Bain's global culture of coaching and apprenticeship across 42 offices, and he redesigned their approach to employee engagement. So Alan, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you very much. You're making me blush.
One of the things I loved about your book is that, as you said when we spoke on the phone a few weeks ago, it's designed to be read on a single airplane flight. And that's exactly what I did. It took about 2 hours. It was a great use of my time, and I believe it's a New York Times bestseller. Am I correct?
That's right. We wanted to. We know that everyone's inboxes are just overflowing, and we said we want to write something really useful, that's really practical, that has tools that people can put into action. And so, yeah, it came out back in June, and it hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So we were really pleased with that.
Fantastic.
That's incredible. You know, at SBI, we often say that success is 50% who you hire and 50% the performance conditions in which you place those individuals. Now, we can debate the exact percentage, but the reality is that people matter. Now, in your book, you spend a lot of time talking about the who. So that's what we'd like to focus on today. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. We are going to use the talent strategy section of SBI's revenue growth methodology to guide our conversation, specifically pages 210 and 211. If you want to follow along at home, you can download a copy of the methodology at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. Ready to go, Alan?
Let's do it.
All righty.
Alan, in our view, there are 7 steps to developing a talent strategy. I know you could probably speak to any of them, but I'd like for our conversation to focus on step 6, which we call talent development. Now, in your book, you define the essence of the who as, and I'm quoting here, hiring the right people onto your team and matching them to the right priorities. Can you elaborate on that, please?
That's right. We get pulled in by investors, CEOs, and chief commercial officers to help think through, how do I get the best people on my team? How do I get a bunch of A players who can run at full power? And we realized that we'd actually done about 15,000 of these assessments for different clients over the last 20 years. And they were just sitting on our hard drives. We weren't doing anything with them. And Steve Kaplan at the University of Chicago gave us a call and said, hey, like you've been asking people about their mums, dads, siblings, what they do at high school, about every single role they've ever had, and then we can go back and predict, like, who's actually gone and outperformed, like, what have they done differently? And so we handed over thousands of these assessments, and he got an army of PhDs, and it took him about 3 years really to try and say, what actually makes a difference here? Like, is it humble people who do better? Is it narcissistic overachievers with sharp elbows who do better? And after a couple of years of looking at this, what we realized is successful leaders get 3 things done. They focus on the right priorities. They get the right people in the right roles. They get the who right, and then they make the relationships work. And so what you're speaking to here is having figured out what are the right priorities for any leader to focus on, how do you get the right people paired against those? And so you've got to do a couple of things, obviously. First of all, you've got to have a discussion over what are the right priorities. How are we going to define what an A player would get done in this role? And we find that most people skip over that step. It's actually at step one in your methodology, and we truly see that as the foundation of defining successful performance. And having defined what those priorities are, you need to go out and hire against them. And so we spent years trying to figure it out, and it actually aligns incredibly well with your methodology here and your seven steps.
Excellent. 15,000 assessments. I think that's a pretty detailed set of research. So, Alan, in your book, you talk about a 3-step process for getting to the who. Diagnosed, developed, deployed. Would you take a minute and go deeper into each one of the 3 Ds?
Absolutely. And so, first of all, as you say, diagnose. So you need to figure out, do you have the right people in the right roles today? And so we recently got an email from a friend of the firm who said that he'd recently retired in his mid-40s, thanks to a little trick we taught him about 5 years ago. We actually were scratching our heads, myself and Jeff Smart and Randy Street, saying we couldn't remember what it told him. And so he said, well, every quarter I sit down and I say, if I had to do my job with 50% of my team, who would I have on my team? And he gets out just a pencil and paper and draws the boxes on the page. Now he says, okay, let's assume I had 75% of the people on my team. Who would make it on my team now? And then he'd say, now I'm allowed 85% of people on my team. Who makes it? And he looks at that to say, who really are the A players? Who are the people who I am reaching out to each time? And those people who don't make it on his page, he says he has a hard meeting with himself in the mirror. And by doing that every quarter over time, he's being able to upgrade the people on the team. But the first step is around diagnosing who do you have today. What you also got to do is say, what do I need those people to get done? And at GH Smart, we've developed something that we call the scorecard, which is if someone is going to be successful in this role, what do you need them to get done? And when we speak to lots of clients and we ask them this question, they give us incredibly vague generalities, and they say things like, well, I'd like the person to be collaborative, or I'd like them to have integrity, or I'd like them to be inspiring. And I don't know what those words mean, and certainly lots of reasonable people could define them differently. Now, when we ask them, say, what do you need them to deliver on? What will make you thrilled in 2017? In December 2017, you've made a great hire. What will they have got done? And suddenly they're able to say, well, they would have probably gone out to 5 key strategic accounts and brought them in the door, and those accounts will be doing more than $2 million run rate, per month, per year. And suddenly they'll talk in terms of SMART goals, or at least we'll get them to. And we get them to write down on a single sheet of paper what would make them thrilled if they'd gone and hired someone that we would call an A player. And an A player is someone who we think is in the top 10% of their peer group at any given salary level for the talent pool that's out there. And so that's around diagnosing what you need and what you need them to and what you need them to get done, and what is the state of the nation today. Where do you need to improve? Then the second step is around how do you develop them. And we see lots of organizations spending huge amounts of money today on, training programs or retreats, and those are all well and good. But we really believe that the best development happens on the job. How do you give the right people stretch opportunities? And then either formally in some kind of talent review process, or more informally, how do you make sure you're giving the folks on your team real opportunities to rise and do things that they may not always enjoy. In fact, they might be scared to do them. But how do they develop themselves? And then third, how do you deploy the right people against the right roles? And there's both art and science to this. What we found in our work with the best CEOs and chief commercial officers out there is they're trying to figure out, how do I, 2/3 of the time, help people play to their strengths, do things that they're really good at, that they already know how to do, and then how do I make sure that 1/3 of what they do is stretching and developing them, and then helping them, helping them grow. And so we see this systematic approach being what the best companies do and the best leaders consistently do.
Really interesting, Alan, especially around the way you've given your readers and now our audience, by extension, a shorthand around the diagnosed, developed, and deployed, kind of a shorthand for the 3 actions they need to keep top of mind. And before we continue, I'd like, if we could, to take a quick break to make our audience aware of a new offering. And when we return, we're going to see how Alan's book ties into some of SBI's points of view on the who. So we'll be right back.
Making your number is hard. Your problems are complex. Complex problems need complex solutions. Introducing the SBI Magazine. Read in-depth stories written by award-winning journalists about how your peers have overcome their problems to make the numbers. When you need more than a tweet, social post, or blog article, turn to the SBI Magazine. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com to subscribe.
Welcome back. My name is Mark Sinek, and I'm a principal with SBI. With me today is my co-host and one of SBI's partners, John Staples, and our guest today is Alan Foster, co-author of Power Score, Your Formula for Leadership Success. Today we're discussing with Alan how a company's leadership should think about who to hire and how to develop talent. And we're using SBI's revenue growth methodology to do this, specifically pages 210 and 211.
Alan, we believe that the old process of the annual review is outdated in our rapidly changing world. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I remember going through years of annual reviews, and actually in a former life when I worked at Bain & Company, I was in charge of trying to get 150 middle managers to write reviews on their reports, and they hated it, and they would be late, and we would have to start the whole process about 2 months ahead of time, and ultimately they would copy and paste stuff, and it would be non-specific. They wouldn't be confrontational, or be prepared to deliver anything that wasn't just a sort of vaguely positive message. And the whole thing took thousands of hours, but didn't actually come up with anything useful. So what we see the best companies doing out there is a couple of things. The one is, how do you make sure you set incredibly clear expectations so people know what they need to prioritize? And then secondly, how do you make sure you give real-time feedback just in time? Because when we are about to walk into a difficult sales meeting, or we've just come out of one, that's when we're actually really open to help and mentorship. And but if you sit me down in a windowless office on a cold, rainy day in January and tell me I need to be more customer-focused, one, I don't really know what that means, and second, I'm certainly not going to remember when I'm in the thick of the action about to walk into the boardroom. So what we see great leaders do is they are able to set a short number of clear priorities for each of their teams. And, a lot of clients ask us, how many priorities is the right number? And so we were recently asked by one of the big U.S. charities to come in and help them think through how do they get better at increasing their talent, improving their talent management. And we went and sat down with the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and I said, could you talk us through like your, what your priorities are for the year? He goes, oh, yes, absolutely. We've got priorities. In fact, this year we've got 164 priorities. And he looked at me with pride. And we sort of smacked our foreheads and said, you've probably got 164 goals, but by definition, those are not priorities. And so what we see the best leaders do is they actually can cull it down to somewhere between 3 and 5 priorities. 3 is better than 5, and because we can all remember what they are. And then if we know what they are, when it comes to actually reviewing how we're doing, you might sit down, you might do a weekly huddle. You can actually use that as an opportunity to say, how are we doing? How can we be helping each other? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And so it's that frequent cadence of small bits of nudging feedback or feed forward, saying what we could do differently for next time is much more effective than sitting me down and giving me a 25-page review about something that I can't even remember that I did 9 months ago.
No, that's great, and I love the team prioritization. And if I have 164 priorities, I really don't have any priorities because there's too many to even keep track of. But as you think about that, Alan, can you tell our audience about how you help companies with talent development or individual development plans?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It's something that we have both struggled with internally at GH Smart. We have a very talented and ambitious crew who I count for my colleagues. And we started implementing something a couple of years ago now that I'll be honest, I was a bit skeptical of. But they said, let's each write our own career roadmap. What on earth does that mean? And so what we each do is we sit down and say, who am I trying to be in 10 years' time? Like, if the next decade went fantastically well, what will I get done? Like, what will happen? And then the next question is, okay, what would you love to happen in 3 years' time? What would that look like? And we start writing it down. And it includes some stuff from where I work at GH Smart. It might include some other things about, my family or friends, but it's pretty broad. And then it goes into, so given that, what strengths do I want to work on and do I want to develop? And then what behaviors do I need to change? And then finally, how can other people help me do that? And it's literally just one sheet of paper. And it's not like the company needs you to be more strategic, or it's not a top-down development process. It's actually allowing people to say what do they want to work on, what they think their strengths are, and it becomes a communication tool where people can sit down with their supervisors, with their mentors, with their peers, and say, here's where I'm trying to go, and here's where I would like help. And we found people have responded incredibly well to that. And it's a forcing, all it really is a forcing function to get people to talk about development and talk about things that they want to work on. We see people make mistakes doing it. For example, if you're dealing with a bunch of high achievers, they'll write themselves a development plan that has nothing about what they're good at and 23 things they want to improve and work on. Right. And it'll be thoroughly ambitious. And it will be totally unrealistic, and they will have, lost 40 pounds and traveled the world and closed, $10 million deals by next Tuesday. And so, at that point, the supervisor can then help them and craft something that's more realistic. But it often opens up the supervisor's mind to, hang on a sec, I didn't realize that, that young Fred here actually wanted to work on that. I've got, I could send him out to lunch with, that friend of mine or that former boss or someone who works over in finance, and that would really open up Fred's mind to the things that he wants to do. So what we're interested in, to cut a long story short, is how do you provoke the right conversations between the right people, given where you want people to go?
I think that leads in well to my next question. One of the terms in the book that stood out was a term you used during the Diagnose phase, and it's this idea of the skill-will bullseye. So I'd like it if you would elaborate on that concept for our audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think that the hiring process, in fact, the interview is one of the most flawed processes in the Western world today. Right now we have, everyone thinks, oh my goodness, I've got an interview candidate coming in, they print out the resume that they haven't really read properly, and then they go and sort of muddle their way through some kind of 30 or 40-minute interview asking a bunch of softball questions that the candidate's relatively prepared for, and it's actually quite hard to figure out, are they any good or not? And so at the end of the day, the interviewer is left thinking, they were quite good, but I'm not quite sure. And so what we need people to do when they're interviewing is to use some tools and techniques that can separate the wheat from the chaff. And so one of these is the skill will bullseye, and that is when you're thinking about hiring someone for a role, you need to think what do I need them to get done? And as I mentioned earlier, you want to have already written the scorecard of the 3 to 5 priorities that will define success in this role. You're then going to be interviewing them, and we recommend interviewing them about at least the last 5 jobs that they've had, talking to them about what's gone really well and what they're proud of, and also some meaningful mistakes that they've made. And what you get from that is how what their skill is, and to what extent is what they've done a great match for what you need them to do. What we'll also get them to do is we ask them, right at the beginning of every interview, we ask people, so what are your career goals? Incredibly open-ended. People take it very different ways. But it's only 5 words long, what are your career goals? And it really cuts to how ambitious are you? Where are you trying to go with your career? What are you trying to do? And really, how hungry are you? And this is about your will. What are you motivated to do? Where are you trying to go? And when interviewers sit back and say, to what extent was that candidate, would I be thrilled to hire them? We'd ask you to say, if you draw 2 axes on a blank piece of paper, what's their level of skill and relevance for the role, and then what is their will? How motivated are they to do these things? Some people are motivated by results and achieving them, a lot of the great sales folks. Some people are motivated by, affiliating with people, but, hanging out at the water cooler and, and chatting away. And you need to think through, what motivates this person, and is that a match with what I'm looking for?
It's a really clear way to break it down, Alan. In a recent episode, actually, of SBI TV, our CEO, Greg Alexander, interviews the Chief Revenue Officer of Rackspace on the topic of talent acquisition. And I think it's relevant to this conversation because Rackspace offers what they call fanatical customer support. And so who they hire is tremendously important to them. Now, our audience today might be interested in this, so let's take a short break, if we could, and educate everyone on how to subscribe to SBI TV. We'll be right back, Alan.
You are watching SBI TV. This is a monthly web TV show featuring guests just like you, executives trying to grow their revenues. Each month, you can peek behind the scenes and watch your peers discuss their strategies for how they make their numbers. You are not going to want to miss this.
Welcome back. My name is Mark Sinek, and I'm a principal with SBI. With me today is one of SBI's partners, John Staples, and our guest today is Alan Foster, co-author of the book Power Score, Your Formula for Leadership Success. So Alan, in the book you write the following, and I'm quoting here, training accounts for only a small fraction of learning. The majority of development comes through on-the-job experiences and the coaching, and that's all in capital letters, coaching that you give people along the way. One thing we see over and over again as a key differentiator of poor versus great sales organizations is how the frontline sales managers coach and mentor their teams. And I would really love your thoughts on this topic.
Absolutely. It reminds me. So here's the mistake that lots of people, managers, make: is they survey their team or they survey their organization and say, "What would you like? If in order to make this a better team or better place to work, like what can we do?" And lots of employees don't really know how to answer that question, and they often say, "Oh, we'd like more training." And so the HR department get very busy and say, we must do more training. And so programs get rolled out, and then people, are too busy to go, and then the training's not very good, and it's not really applicable in real life. So we see huge amounts being wasted in training. Now, don't get me wrong. If it's really timely and in the moment and applicable for what you need people to do, it can have a great return, but too frequently it's wasted. Instead, as you said, we see focused and targeted coaching that is closely tied to the time when people are about to execute on whatever it is that they need to do. I'm a Brit, and the largest supermarket in the UK that's part owned by Walmart is called Asda. And when the new chairman, Archie Norman, took over Asda, he went in, and there was lots of money being spent on training, and everyone was just sitting around having meetings, and it was meetings all day, morning, noon, and night. And so he did something unusual, which was he got rid of all the chairs from the corporate offices and says, instead, we're going to have high tables. So everyone's allowed to meet, but you have to meet standing up. And this was one genesis of the huddle, which Rackspace use, which many other great companies are using on a weekly basis, which is like, how do you get the right people to come together at the right time? And these can be either daily, like at a supermarket just before the doors open to make sure everyone knows what's going on. It can be twice daily, like at a restaurant, that the staff come together just before the food comes out to talk about the specials and how they're going to engage with the customers coming through the door. Or more common in business and in sales, it's on a weekly basis. And how do you get it's an energized 40-minute meeting where people come together to say, what are our priorities for this week? How can we help each other? And that is where it's an incredible forum for learning. And I think a lot of people imagine coaching as being some kind of like awkward sit down and difficult feedback. We don't see it like that at all. We see it as being two-way. So it may be the more senior person advising the person who's on their team, but just as likely we see peers helping each other, and we wouldn't call it coaching per se. We'd just think of it as, how do we help someone the next time they're in a difficult situation? And so we really see that can make the difference, but you have to have a culture where that's acceptable, where if you give a useful thought or tip to someone, you're not slammed down and told, not to do that again. So that's what we see as being, these routine cadence of meetings that allow the right people to come together at the right times to talk about the right things. And that's where great coaching happens. It's where people set the right priorities, and it's also where they build relationships.
That's perfect. Hey, I want to kind of keep that dialogue going, Alan, but I want to specifically talk about the head of sales. So how can the head of sales be sure that his or her sales managers are spending the appropriate amount of time coaching and mentoring?
So there are a couple of things that we see the best heads of sales do. First of all, they have a plan themselves for what it is, what are their priorities, what are they trying to get done, and that's something that they share with people on their team, so that their goals are the team's goals. We also see they bring that team together at a regular time, just as we shared, to talk about how we're doing. What's the plan? What's going well? What's not going well? And how can we help each other? And the more that is done at the same time each week in a disciplined way, with the same questions being asked, the higher the probability that it just becomes an ingrained habit that people do, and it trains the way that people act. But then you're going to have some, and the final thing is, when we look across the 15,000 interviews we've done, and however we cut the data, the biggest mistake sales leaders make, CEOs make, all leaders make, is they tolerate underperformance, and they deep down they know that someone isn't quite cutting it, and they probably need to go, but they feel bad themselves, and they feel guilty that they haven't been able to coach and develop people. And so we see the leaders who have had more successful careers have leaned in on those underperformers and done something about it. They've either found a way to turn them around, but just as likely they found that person's highest and best use is somewhere else, and instead they've gone out and hired a true A player. Instead of having to have remedial coaching conversations, you've got someone who is motivated and a ball of energy and just needs to be pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree quite with that. And the question I always like to ask, or the leaders, is would you hire them right now? Would you hire them again? So we're going to take one more break. If you liked listening to Alan and want access to more peer-driven best practices, here's how to subscribe to the SBI blog.
Each day, you receive hundreds of emails, tons of text messages, countless telephone calls, and sit in too many meetings. How do you find ideas to make the number with all this noise? The SBI blog filters all this nonsense for you and presents only first-rate ideas to make the number. Simplify your life. Subscribe to one blog and read the best content. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com and subscribe today.
Welcome back, everyone. Alan, let's bring this conversation home. Other than directing people to your book, which is the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Power Score, Your Formula for Leadership Success, which I can definitely recommend, what are the one or two things, if you were speaking directly to our audience, that you would tell them to do next to potentially evaluate their existing talent development process?
That's a great question. So we believe that the most powerful tools that you can use, they don't actually cost anything. It's about how do you have the right conversation with your team. And there's one conversation that everyone listening can have with their team, which involves asking 3 questions. And so if anyone's listening and got a bit of paper, here's what you'd write down. First, write down the letter P. And P stands for priorities. And the question is, to what extent do we have the right priorities? And that's the question to ask the team. Everyone give a score between 1 and 10. 10 out of 10 means you think the priorities are correct, they're clear, and they're connected to the mission and vision of what you're trying to get done as a team. Then write down the letter W, which stands for who. So do you have the right who? So the question you ask is, to what extent do we have the right people in the right roles? And a 10 out of 10 means you have the vast majority of your team are A players who are firing on all cylinders, and you're not needing to make major changes. And then finally, you write down the letter R. R stands for relationships. And the question that you would ask your team is, to what extent do the relationships work? And again, if you give a 10 out of 10 on that third question, that means that the right people are coming together at the right time to talk about the right things. So this isn't about everyone being happy and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. This is about, are we working effectively so we can deliver results? And so everyone, if you do this, everyone on your team has now written down 3 numbers between 1 and 10. And you can multiply them together, and you will calculate your power score, power being an acronym for P, W, and R, priorities, who, and relationships. And your power score helps you understand how are you performing as a team. And what you should do is get everyone to share their power scores. And guess what? You'll all have different scores, even though you're talking about the same team. And the most important conversation you can have is, what is driving your power score? What's dragging it down? And then to have that conversation takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and we find the best teams are now in the same way that they're asking their customers maybe about net promoter scores and trying to track that as a closed-loop system, people are saying, what are our power scores internally to say, are we focused on the right priorities? Do we have the right people in the right roles? And to what extent do the relationships work? And if you're just going to go away and do one thing over the next week, takes 15 to 20 minutes, doesn't cost anything. All you need is a pencil and a sheet of paper and to gather your team together to have that conversation.
Great points, Alan. Okay, what does all this mean to you, the audience? Sales and marketing teams cannot make their number if they don't have the right talent strategy. This is why you care. If you want to make sure you get this right, get a copy of this year's research report called How to Make Your Number in 2016 at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. If you feel like you'd like some help, you can have one of our experts lead you through a workshop which will focus on talent strategy development. You can go to our website, Sales Benchmark Index, and request a workshop.
Alan, thank you for letting us put you on the spot today. Our audience benefited greatly, and I'd also like to thank our audience for tuning in. This show's become very popular, and with this popularity comes our ability to get great guests like the one we had today. So thank you, and I wish all of you much success as you try to make your number. Take care.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.